Day 1077 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 842,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,270 losses in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 18 tanks, 24 APVs, a whopping 66 artillery, and one multiple launch rocket system, which could be considered a higher yield artillery platform worthy of its own category. Then headed across and starting in the Ukrainian map today, which is quite rare these days given all of the activity we typically find in Russia at the moment, and headed straight to Pokrovsk, where numerous active engagements have been recorded, with for instance Ukrainian soldiers from the 38th Marine Brigade that repelled a Russian offensive in this direction, striking 2 Russian infantry fighting vehicles and a tank shed or turtle tank. And though it is always an active front right now, but it does depend on where and how. Because we also saw the event of a Russian BTR-82 armored personnel carrier coming up onto one of their held positions, providing fire support as it made the perilous journey, followed by dropping off an infantry assault squad of 9 soldiers under the nose of a Ukrainian drone. As soon as those soldiers exited the vehicle, it took on Ukrainian fire, leading to the need for a quick getaway, luckily done so for the vehicle. The Russian infantry remained dropped off, but didn't get much of an opportunity to do anything, instead becoming receivers of drone-dropped munitions all over the place. And this event is one such classic case of how the Kremlin's mobilized or contract troops hold positions, because it can be incredibly attritional as their personnel carrier vehicles make a mad dash to the front lines, drops them off, waits until expiration of those troops, followed by doing it all over again, and sometimes in civilian cars. It's all part of the larger self-created status quo Russia has found itself in, amounting to an unquenchable thirst for manpower to hold the lines or break new ground wherever they can. Then headed north on the map, where Russian forces are pushing hard to expand their Kupyansk salient, a move led by elements of their 6th Combined Arms Army. This isn't just a skirmish, it's part of a longer-term strategy to encircle Russian positions, and also aiming to cross the Oskil River north and south, and to place pressure on Borova. It's a heavy-handed approach, lacking the speed of mechanized warfare a great deal of the time, but one that suggests Moscow is intent on capturing what is mostly Kharkiv territory here. And if they were to reach the eastern edge of the Oskil River, chances are they would see no reason to stop there, just taking and taking. But also a desire to recaptured lost territory, as identified in the large swaths of green noted here. Then to something a little bit different, headed to the Kremina forest direction, where seen here is the camera point of view from an AFU fiber optic FPV drone that failed to detonate once it reached its position of a Russian dugout. But failing that, or more likely in spite of that, there was a Baba Yaga heavy drone that later struck the dugout, performed by the 53rd Mech Signum drone team. Then also of note on the map in the last day, a Ukrainian drone destroyed a Russian OSA air defense system, exposing the limitations of the older Soviet-era SHORAD, so the short-range air defense platform. The OSA has a 15-kilometer range and radar tracking, but lacks modern electronic warfare defenses. Certainly not part of its standard kit, making it vulnerable to FPV and loitering munitions. Then also on the map in the east, a Ukrainian mothership deployed an interceptor FPV drone, successfully neutralizing a Russian reconnaissance drone. An event like this marks a recent new chapter in air defenses for Ukraine, showcasing the rapid evolution of FPV technology into a cost-effective and lethal aerial countermeasure. Then headed a little bit west to take a look at some of the changing geopolitical dynamics in the region, because in a move to tackle the energy crisis in the breakaway region of Transnistria, next door's Moldova has approved a 30 million euro gas purchase aid package for the Kremlin-aligned region using EU grant funds. This decision comes after Russian gas supplies were cut off, leaving Transnistria in the cold, somewhat literally. The Moldovan government will purchase the natural gas from Europe and Ukrainian trading platforms, ensuring daily supplies of up to 3 million cubic meters. Interestingly, while Moldova has stepped up to help, the Russian-aligned Transnistria initially rejected the offer, now facing rolling blackouts. But it looks like push came to shove, leading to this update and further limiting Russia's economic influence over the pro-Russian breakaway republic. Then headed across to some news for today. So starting off quickly, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that the UK will provide unprecedented military aid to Ukraine this year. Speaking alongside NATO's Mark Rutte in Brussels, Starmer emphasised the UK's unwavering commitment to stabilise the front lines and enhancing Ukraine's defensive capabilities. This announcement follows a landmark 100-year partnership agreement signed on January 16, solidifying long-term cooperation across various sectors from defense and security to economy and trade between the two nations. So although it's not unexpected, nonetheless it's a boost to Ukrainian sovereignty. Then to some more news. So Ukraine's laser weapons are no longer just a concept. Colonel Sakharevsky, commander of the newly formed Unmanned Systems Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, confirmed that these high-tech tools can effectively engage airborne targets. Information is limited, but there have already been multiple projects in R&D, with at least one or some already deployed for specific use case scenarios, capable of hitting certain targets at certain altitudes, as was specified in this interview, and with hints that this could relate to targeting Russia's inbound Shahed drones, so getting lasered out of the sky. Now, although information is sparse given OPSEC requirements, laser weapons would generally look like one of two things: either ground-based laser defense systems, which are large, bulky, require significant power source infrastructure. Alternatively, another main option is the all-round, less bulky case of UAV-mounted laser systems, smaller, more mobile laser units fitted onto drones for targeting enemy drones or objects. And while power limitations might restrict their effectiveness compared to ground-based systems, advances in DEWs, which stands for Directed Energy Weapons, so lasers again, could enable short-range drone-mounted laser use, able to fire off a small number of shots, also known in this case as firing a beam, or lasing a target. And given that this latest partial insight of the newly developing laser weapon platforms is coming from the commander of the newly established branch of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Unmanned Systems Forces, then we're very likely talking about laser-mounted UAVs with a hybrid power system, including that of a battery plus a combustion engine, or instead use of a turbine-based jet propulsion turbo generator to produce excess electricity. Either way, they're platforms that are really on the cutting edge of defense and also really capture the imagination. Then headed across to some of the biggest news right now, which is Ukraine's rare earth metals, about $15 trillion worth, as US President Donald Trump has floated the idea of trading American military aid to Ukraine for the nation's vast reserves of mineral deposits. Speaking to reporters, Trump suggested that Washington is considering an exchange, access to some of Ukraine's critical minerals in return for continued support against Russian aggression. Ukraine, who is rich in resources like lithium, uranium, titanium, among many others, is reportedly open to a deal, aligning with one of the points in President Zelensky's broader peace plan, where it emphasized Ukraine's large deposits of critical minerals and proposes strategic economic partnerships with Western nations to protect these resources. One caveat, however: much of Ukraine's mineral wealth lies in the eastern regions currently under Russian occupation, about 60% of it in fact. So a fifth or a sixth of Ukrainian lands happens to have half of all their mineral wealth, approximately $8 trillion worth. and a location of which also happens to be Russia's geographical main focus of occupation in this war. And it's probably worth noting that the sheer volume of these reserves, worth 15 trillion, really does tend to dwarf, say, 50 billion in military aid here, or 300 billion in frozen Russian assets there, making it somewhat of a controversial topic. Take, for instance, German Chancellor Scholz stating that it would be selfish and self-centered to use these resources for defense funding during the war, responding to Trump's statement on access to Ukrainian rare earth minerals in exchange for defense aid. But proponents of the deal instead suggest that it's better that the US and Europe has some sort of access, and especially so in contrast to Russia and China having access. Other views on the matter include the example of where Ukraine is unable to defend itself through a lack of military aid, leading to a complete loss of access to much of the reserves, leaving them in Russian hands, meaning to say, better to keep a percentage of something instead of getting 100% of nothing. Not to mention from the Western angle, the added bonus of European and global security that comes from continued defense against Russian aggression. Then headed across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment. So here we go. A mother of a Russian serviceman is trying to get the word out about what happened to her son in the SMO. On December 10, he was sent to Toretsk. 13 days later, he and another were effectively snatched by another battalion of the same brigade, quarantined without communication, no access to the outside world. Then a few days later, in some sort of non-approved clandestine operation, Russian style, her son and others were handcuffed and had 2 anti-tank mines attached to their vests with scotch tape and sent to the front. 2 days later, the commander listed her son as AWOL. Now, she was advised this information from another present at the time, although the contact fears for their life and will only testify to these events after receiving guarantees of protection, which is largely impossible given the circumstances. And it's possible that this unit performing these actions doesn't want to use their own men. Thereby, they snatch soldiers from different units. But one of the most unusual parts in all of this is that the mother hopes that this story will reach the president so that it won't get hushed up. Unfortunately, that would be perhaps the best surefire way to get silenced. The way Russians treat their own is pretty despicable. It looks like Russia has a few more growing pains to get through before their society has a much more strict non-acceptance of this type of behavior, culminating to a sobering realization that the Kremlin has zero compassion for human life. Then headed across to a bit of a funny to round it all off today, guys. It's a little bit of a different one here, but here we go. So a Russian state media news outlet, TASS, released an article yesterday that said Ukraine's use of one-way attack UAVs inside of Russia suggests a shortage of weapons and personnel, which, first of all, is combining or blending 2 or more distinct things into one, conflating, as they say. Secondly, this Russian news report is only referencing the date of January 20 when Ukrainian UAVs were targeting Russia. Very odd given it's a newly published article. And thirdly, it went on to state that the Russian forces were effective in countering these UAV attacks through their own robust air defense systems. So it's an article based in complete denial of the realities their country faces from unprotected airspace. But at the same time, a news story that they had to write because it is getting somewhat undeniable at this point that the AFU drone incursions exist in Russia. So the worst thing about being a dishonest nation is that they're being dishonest with themselves as well, as yet another example of them sticking their heads in the sand. All the meanwhile, many Ukrainian aerial vehicles fly unrestricted into their airspace. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. Napoleon Bonaparte, eat your heart out. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!